Hey everyone, it's me here. Today we're gonna be asking the question, is the moon landing fake? On July 20th, 1969, astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin became the first humans to walk on the moon. They say that the images and videos were all captured in a studio lot and that the astronauts never really went to the moon at all. So today, we're going to take a look at some of the evidence for and against the moon landings being real and see if we can come to a conclusion. It was an incredible achievement, and one that helped inspire generations of scientists, engineers, and dreamers to push the boundaries of what's possible. Now, when Buzz Aldrin was preparing for his mission, he had the logo of the eagle, globe and anchor, which is the logo of the USMC, sewn onto his helmet. Now, when you look at the images of the astronauts on the moon, you may have noticed that their shadows look a bit weird. They're not sharp and defined like you would expect. So does this mean that the images were fake and the astronauts were actually in a studio lot? I don't think that there is any doubt that they happened. And that's my opinion. Well, not necessarily. You see, the reason why the shadows look the way they do is because of the lighting conditions on the moon. And while you're down there, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss out on any of my future videos. The lunar surface is very bright and reflective, so it can be difficult to see shadows sometimes. It has a really well-made documentary and it does a great job of exploring all of the evidence surrounding the moon landings. If you did, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any of my future videos. So to make it easier to see the astronauts, NASA intentionally set their cameras up so that the shadows would be soft and diffused. This made it easier to see the astronauts, but it also made their shadows look weird. This is because he was a Marine, and he was proud to represent his branch of the military. First of all, there is just so much evidence that the moon landings happened. We have thousands of images and hours of video footage. And not only that, but we have physical evidence too. For example, there are moon rocks. The astronauts brought back hundreds of pounds of moon rocks. And these rocks have been studied by scientists all over the world. They have also been dated, and they are billions of years old. Additionally, there are other pieces of evidence that are often overlooked. For example, there are eyewitness accounts from the astronauts themselves. They say that they really did go to the moon and that the landings are real. And not only that, but there are eyewitness accounts from the people who worked on the missions. These are the people who helped to put the astronauts into space and control the missions from the ground. They also say that the landings are real. And finally, there is the fact that the landings were watched by millions of people around the world. At the time, there were millions of people watching the landings on television. If the landings were fake, then it would have been one of the biggest cover-ups in history. It would have involved thousands of people and it would have been impossible to keep secret. But when you look closely at the logo, you can see that it is upside down. Now, this has led some people to believe that the landings were fake. They say that if Aldrin was really an astronaut, then shouldn't the logo be right side up? Well, actually, the logo is right side up. It was just flipped upside down so that Aldrin could read it while he was wearing the helmet. Astronauts train for their missions for years, but very few of them become astronauts. They usually stay on Earth and do training simulations. So it makes sense that Aldrin would want to put the logo on his helmet so that he could read it while he was doing training simulations. I am just a guy with a camera and a YouTube channel. So take everything I say with a grain of salt. Now, when you look at the images of the moon landings, you may have noticed that the lunar surface doesn't look quite right. It looks like there is no atmosphere, but we know that the moon has an atmosphere called an exosphere. So where is it? Well, it turns out that the images were taken in a way that made the exosphere invisible to our cameras. You see, the exosphere is only about 100 kilometers thick. That's pretty thin. And it's mostly made up of helium, neon and argon. These gases are very light, and they escape into space very easily. That means that the exosphere is almost a vacuum. And in a vacuum, sound can't travel. So the astronauts wouldn't be able to hear anything. And that includes the sound of their own voices. To solve this problem, NASA developed a special radio system that allowed the astronauts to communicate with each other and with mission control back on Earth. But this system couldn't pick up the sound of the exosphere. So it was essentially silent to us. But over the years, there have been many people who have claimed that the moon landings were actually fake. The first thing that I want to look at is the US flag waving in the wind. Now, if you've ever seen any footage of the moon landing, you may have noticed that the US flag appears to be waving in the wind. And this has led some people to believe that the landings were fake. They say that if these images were really taken on the moon, shouldn't the flag be flying straight out behind the astronauts? Well, here's a telescopic pole that holds out the flag like that. When they didn't use it, it was scrunched up to conserve space in the spacecraft for 4 days. If you scrunch up a piece of fabric, then let it unfurl, it will naturally sort of do that. It also looks like the telescopic pole holding out the flag is clearly visible in some photos. But again, this is a telescopic pole that holds out the flag like that. When they didn't use it, it was scrunched up to conserve space in the spacecraft for 4 days. If you scrunch up a piece of fabric, then let it unfurl, it will naturally do that. There are even photos that show the telescopic pole clearly. But when you compare them to the telescopic pole used by a skydiver, you can see that they are very similar. The pole used by the skydiver is just wider and made out of a different material. Now, before we get started, I just want to say that I am not a scientist. Okay, let's get started. The next piece of evidence that I want to look at is the USMC logo on Aldrin's helmet. The next thing that I want to look at is the lunar surface itself. The next thing that I want to look at is the shadow of the astronauts. Alright, so now that we've looked at some of the evidence for and against the moon landings being real, let's talk about why I think they are real. So overall, I think that the evidence overwhelmingly shows that the moon landings are real. Now I want to hear from you. What do you think? Were the moon landings real or fake? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you want to learn more about the moon landings, I highly recommend checking out the documentary called In the Shadow of the Moon. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.